Hello, and welcome to the Golden Trope Story Hour, where ChatGPT generates the story and Fake Marlon Brando generates the excitement. This week's episode, 80s TV Cop Show. Dear Chat, I hope this communique finds you well. Can you write me a 1980s TV cop show, please? Yes, writes Chat. Do. Here we go. Our 80s cop show is called Edge of the Badge. Edge of the Badge, Act 1. The city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin was alive with a symphony of chaos, honking horns, screeching tires, and distant sirens. The roar of a motorcycle echoed through the tight downtown streets. The motorcyclist looked over his shoulder. He couldn't believe that battered old sedan was sticking so closely to him. In that sedan, Detective Jake Malone gripped the wheel with the kind of grin that can only come from a total disregard for consequences. A loose tie dangled around his neck, and yesterday's stubble shadowed his square jaw. The thief glanced back again, his panicked eyes meeting Jake's unwavering smirk. "You think you can outrun me, buddy?" Jake muttered to himself, his voice rough like gravel. Jake Malone leaned forward in his seat, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he tailed the speeding motorcycle. The thief ahead was brazen, weaving recklessly through midday traffic. Jake's unmarked sedan, a beat-up Crown Victoria barely held together by bondo and attitude, roared after him. "Come on," Jake muttered under his breath, his knuckles punching the dashboard. He winced, realizing that was a bad idea. He slapped the steering wheel for an encore instead. The bike swerved into the oncoming lane, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision with a moving truck. Jake didn't hesitate, pushing his car harder, the engine growling in protest. He ignored the pedestrians on the crosswalk, jolting the sedan over the curb, sending a trash can rolling into traffic. Pedestrians scattered, and a vendor cursed loudly as his fruit cart toppled over. There it is. Jake barely noticed, his focus locked on the thief. He nearly clipped a delivery van as a frantic voice crackled over the police radio. "Malone, stand down, you're a block away from the mayor's fundraiser." Jake grabbed the receiver, grinning. "Relax, Cap. I'll get him before the appetizers." Ahead, the thief turned down an impossibly narrow alley. Jake followed, his side mirrors scraping against the brick walls. The alley spat them out into a bustling farmer's market, where vendors dove for cover as the motorcycle zipped past. Jake's sedan plowed through a stand of tomatoes, sending crimson fruit flying. He locked eyes with the thief, who again glanced back, panicked. Just then, the bike's rear tire ran over a couple of rolling tomatoes. The motorcycle wobbled, tipped, and skidded across the pavement. Jake grinned. "Gotcha." The thief rolled to a stop and bolted on foot, but Jake was already out of the car, tackling him to the ground. He hauled the thief up by the collar, his grip ironclad. "Game over, scumbird," Jake said. "End of the line." By the time Jake dragged the thief into the precinct, the bullpen was abuzz with his latest antics. Detectives exchanged knowing smirks, and the desk sergeant shook his head. Captain Romano stepped out of his office, steam practically pouring from his ears. "Malone, do you have any idea what you've done?" Romano thundered, slamming a folder onto his desk. Papers scattered like fallen leaves. Jake threw himself into the chair opposite Romano's desk, propping his boots up. "Yeah, I got the guy who's been robbing jewelry stores all across our high-rent district." "You also wrecked a farmer's market, destroyed city property, and scared the hell out of half the mayor's staff. The mayor himself called me," the captain roared. "The mayor!" Romano rubbed his temples. "You're a damn liability, Malone." Jake shrugged sympathetically. "It comes with the job." The captain's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "The commissioner wants your badge, Jake. The mayor wants your badge. The press is all over our switchboard. I'm running out of excuses to keep you on the force. Jake stood up defiantly. Hey, why don't you tell the commissioner and the press and the mayor himself that I got the scumbag so his little crime wave is over, and tell him I said they're welcome. Jake sat back down. At least I know the insurance companies will thank me. Not the ones who insure city property, Romano glared at him. That's it. I'm assigning you a partner. Jake groaned. Not this again. Parker Kim, Romano bellowed. The bullpen fell silent as Detective Lisa Parker Kim entered. She was striking, with sleek black hair, an elegant and athletic figure dressed in a sharply tailored skirted suit, and Eurasian facial features that radiated competence, confidence, and a rare type of exotic beauty. Her heels clicked confidently on the tile as she walked through the room to Romano's office. Jake, Romano said, this is Lisa Parker Kim. Detective Parker Kim, meet Jake Malone, your new partner. Lisa extended a hand. It's nice to meet you. Jake hesitated, then shook her hand. Malone. Parker Kim graduated top of her class at Harvard and Quantico. She has a spotless record, Romano said, glaring at Jake. Lord knows why she's working in this precinct with those credentials, but maybe some of her professionalism will rub off on you. Lisa glanced at Jake. I look forward to working together. I'm looking forward to having you rub off on me, Jake smirked as he stroked his mustache. That must be a euphemism. Mustache must be a euphemism here. I see you're going to live up to your reputation, Lisa said, rolling her eyes. Yeah, you're in for a real treat, Jake said, a twinkle in his eyes. Detective Parker Kim looked plaintively at the captain. You two should get along just fine, Romano assured her, but he couldn't hide the devilish gleam in his own eye. Meanwhile, in a modest suburban home across town, Thomas Grayson, a tall and sinewy man in his late 30s, busied himself with soundproofing materials in the basement. He had sectioned off a corner of the basement with 2x4s and drywall and soundproofing panels instead of traditional insulation. It was a much more expensive project that way, but he wanted to be absolutely certain that the neighbors would never hear a thing. The new room was a dingy little room, illuminated by a single naked bulb, but Grayson was happy with it. His only concern was the window. The way his basement was configured, he was unable to section off a windowless area, which of course would have been the ideal. Still, he was able to build this chamber in such a way that it incorporated a backyard window, and there was virtually no chance of anyone wandering into the backyard, not in this safest of neighborhoods. Thomas Grayson was happy today because he was putting up the drywall on the inside of the new room, and all that was left was to shove some soundproofing material into the window and seal it in. He wouldn't even have to put off his hobby. He could just stuff the soundproofing into the inside ledge for now and seal it later. He couldn't wait to use this room. He whistled as he drywalled. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, the bullpen buzzed with activity. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, detectives murmuring over evidence boards. Lisa Parker Kim unpacked a neatly organized box at her desk, setting out a case file, a notebook, a legal pad, 2 pens, 2 pencils, Ticonderoga No. 2s, a pencil sharpener, an extra rubber eraser, a Tupperware container containing her lunch, 2 cucumber and cream cheese sandwiches quartered diagonally with the crusts cut off, and a stick of celery, a pack of dental floss, a thermos of chicory coffee, and a pristine coffee mug with No. 1 Daughter written on it, which she had bought for herself. Across from her, Jake lounged, balancing his chair on 2 legs. He removed the toothpick he was chewing on from between his teeth. "What's your deal?" he asked, breaking the silence. "My deal is solving cases efficiently and professionally," Lisa said pointedly. Jake laughed. "You sound like a brochure." Lisa looked up from the case file, finally meeting his gaze. Her brown eyes were inscrutable steel. "And you sound like someone who's been skating by on luck and charm. That's not going to work with me, Detective Malone." Jake's grin widened. "Oh, this is going to be fun." He stroked his mustache. "Yeah, that's gotta be a euphemism." Just then, Jake and Lisa were called to attention by Romano. "They found another body at Whitney Park." "The Bambi killer again, Cap? Or is this a one-off?" "That's for you to figure out," Romano said. "The victim's name is Rachel Meyer, 23, Caucasian, female. Stuffed deer left on her chest. Could be Bambi or it could be a copycat. Either way, the press is going to be all over me, so keep me posted." Jake nodded as he shrugged into his chestnut brown members-only jacket. "Let's go," Lisa Parker Kim said. "I'll drive." Whoa, just a minute," Jake objected. "I'll drive." "Sorry," Lisa countered, "but I've heard about your driving." She made air quotes around the word. "I always drive," Jake insisted. "No dice," said Lisa Parker Kim. "Besides, I've seen your car. Mine's much nicer." Jake lit a cigarette as he pored over the victim photos in the passenger seat of Lisa Parker Kim's 1983 Datsun Maxima. "You're right," Jake admitted. "This car is much nicer." Lisa plucked the cigarette from his mouth and crushed it in the ashtray. "No smoking," she said while keeping her eyes on the road. Jake leaned back in his seat. "You always this much fun, Parker Kim?" "Always," she said. "Well, anyways," Jake said, looking at a picture of Rachel Meyer's lifeless body with a small toy stuffed deer sitting on its chest. "It looks like the Bambi killer got his 5th victim." "Yes," Lisa agreed. "It looks that way." Once they got to the park, they headed to the area where Rachel Meyer's body had been found. Jake made small talk with the uniformed officers who were securing the scene. They all gave Lisa admiring glances as she walked past. Then they high-fived Jake and laughed knowingly with each other. Studying the scene, Lisa began making notes into a micro-cassette recorder. That's, for those of you who don't know, that's basically a small Sony Walkman with a record feature. "You like fancy gadgets?" Jake asked as he joined her at the chalk outline. "It helps me keep my thoughts and notes organized," she explained. "I keep all my notes right here," Jake said, tapping his index finger against his temple. "I'm sure there's nothing in there to clutter them up," Lisa said with a wry twist of her pretty little mouth. Oh, Chet got very descriptive about her mouth. "I'm sure there's nothing in there to clutter them up," Lisa said with a wry twist of her pretty little mouth. "If Rachel really is a victim of the Bambi killer, then it doesn't make sense that she'd be found in the open like this. The Bambi killer always takes time to bury his victims in a shallow grave. I think we have a copycat here." "No way," Jake said. "This is the work of our guy." "Serial killers don't deviate so dramatically from their M.O., Lisa insisted. "It doesn't fit with his pattern." "Patterns don't catch killers," Jake said, tapping his temple again. "Instinct does. This was probably a murder of opportunity that he wasn't fully prepared for. Things got a little away from him, so he had to leave her here. But he had the same exact type of stuffed deer with him, which he was able to leave as his calling card. That's the key." Lisa ignored him, studying the victim's file. "Rachel worked at Oak Ridge Community Center part-time while going to school. We'll start there." Lisa could feel Jake bristle at her tone. She thought about softening her hard edge with an apology. That's the edge of the badge. Lisa could feel Jake bristle at her tone. She thought about softening her hard edge with an apology. Instead, she shot him a look. Instinct didn't stop the last 4 murders. Jake locked eyes with her. She held firm. "But maybe it can help prevent the next one," she said, offering that as an olive branch without backing down. Jake shrugged with a frustrated grin. "Lead the way, partner." Across town, Thomas Grayson strolled into Cunningham's Hardware, humming softly to himself. He liked this store. It was always well-stocked and clean. Mr. Cunningham was a very nice man who always went out of his way to greet his customers and help them out personally, to get to know them in a genial, unobtrusive manner. And Mr. Cunningham's daughter had recently blossomed into a most attractive young lady. Joni Cunningham, the owner's teenage daughter, stood behind the counter as Mr. Grayson shopped. Her silky black ponytail bobbed as she smiled brightly. "Hi, Mr. Grayson. Need help with anything today?" Grayson returned the smile, his tone warm and polite. "Just a few odds and ends, Joni. That is your name, isn't it?" Joni nodded, her bright blue eyes gleaming. Thomas Grayson's smile broadened. "Could you point me to the duct tape?" "I'll do better than point," Joni said. She stepped out from behind the counter and led him to the aisle, chatting as they walked. "What kind of project are you working on?" Thomas paused as if considering his answer. He smiled. "Just some do-it-yourself stuff around the house." He made small talk as Joni helped him gather shovels, rope, and a pickaxe. "You must have an interesting house," Joni said, taking inventory of his shopping cart. Thomas chuckled, his eyes crinkling. "I guess maybe I do at that." They walked to the front counter and Joni rang up the sale. They chatted pleasantly about school and boys and stuff like that, while Joni wrote out a receipt and made Mr. Grayson's change. As she watched him walk out of the store, Joni couldn't help but wonder, what the heck kind of do-it-yourself project needed duct tape and rope? She shrugged to herself and pulled her copy of 17 magazine out from under the cash register. She leaned her elbows on the counter as she resumed reading it and forgot all about Mr. Grayson. Meanwhile, Jake and Lisa visited Oak Ridge Community Center to question Rachel's co-workers. The center was pretending to be a cheerful, bustling place filled with colorful posters and smiling volunteers, but it was actually pretty grim. Martha, the center's coordinator, was a large, matronly woman with a kind smile. She sat in her office chair, wringing her hands, her face pale with worry and grief. Across from her, Lisa Parker Kim sat poised, pen and notebook ready, her expression soft but determined. Jake Malone leaned against the doorframe, a silent observer, with arms crossed and a sympathetic frown etched on his face. "We're sorry for your loss," Lisa said. "We're hoping you can help us." Martha nodded tearfully. "Rachel was such a sweet girl. She loved working with the differently abled." Jake was confused. "You mean the handicapped?" Martha gave him a mildly reproachful look. "We discourage the use of that word here." "Why?" Jake asked. "The place is full of 'em." He looked over his shoulder into the corridor for an example he could point to. Parker Kim cleared her throat. "Did Rachel ever mention anyone bothering her?" Lisa asked. "No," Martha said, still eyeing Jake with a look of mild rebuke. Jake cleared his throat. "Let's talk about the night she disappeared. What happened after her shift ended?" Martha hesitated, clutching the tissue tighter. "She finished up around 8. She always took the same bus home. She left through the main entrance like she always does." "Always did," she corrected herself, then sobbed into her tissue, which was a visible mess by then. Lisa leaned forward, extending the box of tissues towards Martha. "Was anyone else working with her that night?" "Thomas Grayson worked with Rachel the night she went missing," Martha said as she grabbed a fistful of fresh tissues. "I don't know if perhaps she mentioned something to him." "Thomas Grayson," Lisa said as she jotted down his name, "and he works here as well." "He volunteers here a few times a week," Martha said, destroying the new tissues with a blow of the nose. "He's always so kind and helpful." Jake arched an eyebrow and nodded toward the box of tissues while fingering the tip of his nose. "Did he leave around the same time as Rachel?" "No, a few minutes later," Martha replied, taking the hint and grabbing another fresh tissue and wiping the tip of her nose. "He always parks in the back lot, so he uses the rear exit. He told me he didn't see Rachel because he drives in the opposite direction, but maybe he did. I don't know. It's all so confusing." Lisa's pen paused. "Did he seem different that day, unusual in any way?" Martha tilted her head, thinking. He was quieter than usual towards the end of the night. Normally he chats with everyone, but that night he kept to himself a little more. Jake pushed off the doorframe. We'll need to talk to him. Do you have his contact information? Martha nodded. Of course, anything to help. If you give me a moment, I'll find his address. She stood and walked over to a file cabinet. Although he's sometimes difficult to get a hold of. I guess it has to do with his regular job. What does he do? Lisa asked. I don't actually know, Martha said as she looked through a file folder. Some kind of freelance work is all he's ever said. He can be very vague about his private life sometimes. Jake and Lisa exchanged a glance. Here it is, Martha exclaimed, holding up a sheet of paper. I'll copy down his address and phone number. Lisa offered her a reassuring smile. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. You've been very helpful. That evening at Cunningham's Hardware. The store was quiet as Joni Cunningham locked up for the night, the fluorescent lights flickering above her. She stepped into the parking lot, her keys jangling in her hand. A familiar voice called out from the shadows, Joni! Startled, she turned to see Thomas Grayson. He was leaning against a really cool leisure van that had a Molly Hatchet album cover airsprayed on its side. He had a friendly smile on his face, too. Oh, Mr. Grayson, you scared me, she said, laughing nervously. Sorry about that, he said, his voice unusually smooth. I just happened to be in the area, thought I'd say hi. Joni tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Well, hi, she giggled. Hi, he laughed. Grayson took a step closer, his hands in his pockets. Long day? Always, Joni replied with a shrug. Dad's been on my case about reorganizing the store. I swear he thinks I'm a robot or something. Thomas chuckled. Parents just don't understand, sometimes. You've got a good work ethic, Joni. It's going to take you far. Joni smiled, a faint blush rising in her cheeks. Thanks. Well, I got to get going. Thomas gestured toward his van. Let me offer you a ride home. It's late and the streets can be dangerous. Joni hesitated, her keys still in her hand. That's really nice of you, Mr. Grayson, but I'm fine. It's not too far. Thomas tilted his head, his smile unwavering. No sense walking alone when I've got a perfectly good van right here. Hey, it's got a killer sound system. I'll let you play whatever you want. Something about his tone made Joni pause, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Finally she nodded. Okay, sure. Thanks. Thomas opened the passenger door for her, his smile lingering as he helped her climb inside.
Edge of the Badge will return after these commercial messages.
Edge of the Badge, Act 2. Jake and Lisa were unable to reach Mr. Thomas Grayson that day. In the evening, Lisa returned to her apartment. It was a careful blend of modernity and tradition. Sleek mauve and chrome furniture alongside framed Korean calligraphy, and a small altar for her ancestors tucked into the corner. As she prepared dinner, her mother called, her voice sharp with disapproval. Lisa, you're not getting any younger. When will you settle down? Lisa sighed, switching to Korean. I'm not ready yet, Uma. My career is important. You're forgetting who you are, her tiger mother said. I'm not forgetting, Lisa replied softly, though she felt the weight of the words. Jake spent his evening on his rooftop with a beer, staring at an old photo of his Vietnam squad. His gaze lingered on the faces of the friends who hadn't made it back. Lisa reminded him of the war in ways he couldn't quite place. She was disciplined, unflappable, and a reminder of a past that he was trying desperately, so desperately, to drink away. But there was something else about her, something that made him want to prove her wrong. Jake's dog, a large Doberman named Ammo, sensed his owner's melancholy and licked his face to comfort him. Okay, Ammo, Jake laughed. Take it easy, or we'll both take a tumble. The next morning, Jake and Lisa parked outside Thomas Grayson's house, a picture-perfect mid-century modern home on a large double lot with great curb appeal. Newer roof, fully guaranteed, HVAC and water heater both replaced within last 5 years, above-ground pool in the backyard, and, best of all, no HOA fees. "Nice lawn," Jake muttered, finishing his coffee. Lisa ignored him, checking her notes. Grayson's volunteered at the center for 5 years. No priors, no complaints. He's clean. "Nobody's clean," Jake said, stepping out of the car. Jake and Lisa approached Grayson's front door, unaware of the darkness waiting on the other side. Inside, Grayson stood in his basement arranging tools on a table. Photos of his victims now lined the walls, each face smiling and full of life. He picked up a photo of Rachel and traced a finger over her face, his lips curling into a smile. Joni's muffled screams died in the dimly lit basement. Her wrists and ankles were bound with duct tape, her eyes wide with terror as she stared at Thomas. She had suffered an awful night. "Well," he said, pacing in front of her, "you wanted to know what kind of project I was working on." He leaned in close, placing his mouth to Joni's ear. "So far, I like you best of all," Grayson whispered. "That's why I haven't disposed of you yet. I'd like to keep you around a while longer." He licked the rim of her ear with the cold, dry tip of his tongue. Joni's eyes bulged in terror, and her chest heaved as she struggled against her restraints, her cries stifled by the cloth in her mouth and the tape over it. The sound of the doorbell upstairs made Thomas pause. He placed a finger to his lips, signaling for her to stay silent, and he ascended the stairs. He moved quickly, silently up the stairs, and, before answering the door, peeked through the bay window curtains to see who it was. It was a couple. The woman looked like a low-level executive, the man like an out-of-work actor. Jehovah's Witnesses, figured Grayson. Then the woman pulled out a badge in preparation to identify herself. Cops! Grayson's blood froze. He took a profound breath to collect himself, then reached for the knob. Just as Jake raised a fist to pound on the door, it creaked slowly open to reveal the not unpleasant face of the lean, middle-aged homeowner. "Mr. Grayson," Lisa began, flashing her badge, "we'd like to ask you a few questions about Rachel Meyer." "Yes, I heard about it on the news. Horrible," Thomas said as he stepped aside. "Please, come in." The interior of his home was tidy, almost obsessively so. Thomas led them to the living room and offered them seats. "Rachel's disappearance has been weighing on all of us," he said, his voice calm. "She was such a sweet girl." Lisa nodded. "We understand you were one of the last people to see her that night. Can you tell us what you remember?" Thomas recounted his story, his tone measured. "Rachel left through the main entrance to catch the bus. I left a few minutes later through the rear exit where my car was parked. I didn't see her after that." Jake leaned forward. "Did you notice anything unusual? Maybe someone hanging around the area?" Thomas shook his head. "No, but by the time I got to my car, the lot was empty. The exit for the parking lot leads to a different street from the bus stop, and I drove in the opposite direction on top of that. I just assumed the bus had already picked her up." Jake leaned forward. "Already?" Grayson's mouth fell open. He shrugged. "I mean, that's why I didn't go offer her a ride. I was headed in the opposite direction and, just told myself that the bus had probably already picked her up." He shrugged again. It made sense, Jake supposed, but his gut told him there was something wrong with this guy. Lisa studied Grayson carefully. "Did Rachel ever mention feeling unsafe or anyone bothering her?" "No," Thomas Grayson said, his expression earnest. "It was just another day, so to speak, nothing out of the ordinary. She seemed perfectly happy, but then she always did. She was a great girl, lots of enthusiasm. I wish they were all like that." "They?" Lisa asked. "People," Grayson clarified. I wish all people could be like her. Look, I wish I could be more help, but frankly it was just a routine day until it turned out not to be. Jake and Lisa exchanged a glance before standing. "Thank you for your time," Lisa said, handing him her card. "If you think of anything else, please don't hesitate to call." Thomas nodded, his smile polite but unreadable. As they walked back toward the street, Lisa slowed to a stop near the leisure van with the cool artwork that was parked in the driveway. She clutched the sleeve of Jake's members-only jacket. "Whoa!" he cried. "Careful with my threads." "Wait," Lisa said, her voice low, her body trembling. "What's up? You gotta pee?" Lisa frowned. Her gaze was fixed on the van. "I'm getting vibrations." "What does that mean?" Lisa hesitated. "It's hard to explain. I've always had this sense. My mom calls it Korean intuition. It's part of our heritage, something passed down. She says I must have inherited it, even though I'm only a half-breed." Jake snorted. "So you're psychic now?" "It's not clairvoyance," Lisa said, annoyed. "It's intuition. I've learned to trust it." "Well, has your intuition ever solved a case?" Jake asked, crossing his arms. Lisa shot him a glare. "You sound like my father. He's a good old-fashioned American skeptic, too." "You mean he's got horse sense? Too bad you didn't inherit that. It would have done you a lot more good." "Look, you don't have to believe me, but something about that van feels off." Jake shrugged. "Let's check it out." "We don't have a warrant," Lisa reminded him. Jake smirked. "Who needs a warrant?" As he reached for the door's handle, Lisa grabbed his arm. "Wait." She nodded toward the house where a curtain had shifted. Jake sighed. "Fine, we'll do it your way." Lisa jotted down the license plate number, her mind racing with possibilities.
Edge of the Badge will continue next week. Last week on Edge of the Badge.
"Malone, stand down. You're a block away from the mayor's fundraiser." "Malone, do you have any idea what you've done?"
"Hey, why don't you tell the commissioner and the press and the mayor himself that I got the scumbag so his little crime wave is over, and you can tell him I said they're welcome."
"That's it. I'm assigning you a partner."
"Not this again."
"Parker Kim!"
"I look forward to working together."
"I'm looking forward to having you rub off on me."
"You two should get along just fine." "They found another body at Whitney Park."
"The Bambi killer again, Cap? Or is this a one-off?"
"Let's go. I'll drive."
"Whoa, whoa, whoa!"
"Hi, Mr. Grayson. Need help with anything today?" "Just a few odds and ends, Joni. That is your name, isn't it?" "Let me offer you a ride home. It's late, and the streets can be dangerous." "Okay, sure. Thanks." "I think we have a copycat here."
"No way. This is the work of our guy."
"Rachel worked at Oak Ridge Community Center part-time while going to school. We'll start there."
Thomas Grayson worked with Rachel the night she went missing. I don't know if perhaps she mentioned something to him. Thomas Grayson, and he works here?
We'll need to talk to him.
"Lisa, when will you settle down? You're forgetting who you are."
"I've always had this sense. My mom calls it Korean intuition. Something about that van feels off."
Let's check it out.
We now continue with part 2 of Edge of the Badge.
In the bustling precinct, Howard Cunningham stood before the desk of Detective Ben Alexander. With Howard was his supple and attractive wife Marion, as well as their teenage son Richie. Their faces were pale with worry as they spoke to Detective Alexander. "Our daughter Joni didn't come home last night," Howard said, his voice tight. Marion clutched Howard's arm, her eyes glistening with tears. "She always walks. She's never late." Richie added, "Her friends haven't seen her either. This isn't like her." Detective Alexander took notes, his expression sympathetic. We'll do everything we can to find her. Can you give me a recent photo and a list of her friends?" Howard handed over a picture, his hand trembling. "Please, she's all we've got." "What about me, Dad?" Richie asked. "Richie, please, this isn't the time for that," Howard snapped. Marion placed a tender hand on Richie's arm. "Richie, of course we love you, but Joni's disappearance is a great strain to your father. Try to understand." "Sure, Mom," Richie nodded. "I understand." "Sorry, Dad." "That's all right, Rich," Howard said tersely. "Detective, will you be able to find our Joni?" Alexander nodded. "We'll get started right away." The Cunninghams' desperation filled the room, a chilling reminder that another piece of the puzzle was now in play, even if no one had yet connected the dots. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above Jake and Lisa as they entered the precinct, the din of ringing phones and rapid keystrokes a familiar cacophony. Jake strolled toward the shared workstation where an aging intra-departmental computer sat, its screen flickering faintly. For those of you who weren't around in the 80s, an intra-departmental computer is sort of like a prehistoric internet computer. Before the internet went worldwide. This was more of a regional. It was sort of like a computer that was connected to other precincts in the Milwaukee Police Department, for example, so that they could communicate with each other and share records, although there was not yet any social media. This is not chat writing, by the way. This is just Fake Marlon pontificating a footnote. But you could probably figure that out on your own. Back to the story. Jake strolled toward the shared workstation where an aging I don't know why it would be aging. In the 80s, it would have been cutting-edge technology, so it should be shiny and new. Be that as it may. Jake strolled toward the shared workstation where an aging intra-departmental computer sat, its screen flickering faintly. Jake tapped his fingers on the desk as Lisa typed Thomas Grayson's license plate number into the system. "You really think this is going to tell us something new?" Jake asked. His tone was skeptical. Lisa Parker Kim crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. Sometimes intuition needs data to back it up. Jake chuckled under his breath. "More of your ESP? Isn't it akin to your instincts?" She deepened her voice on the last word. Let me take that one back. Jake chuckled under his breath. "More of your ESP? Isn't it akin to your instincts?" She deepened her voice on the last word, aping his usual macho tone. "Only if it solves the case, lady." Ignoring his last retort, Lisa Parker Kim leaned over the desk as a series of records began populating the monitor's screen. The details of Thomas Grayson's mysterious but cool leisure van were clear as day. "There it is," Lisa said, pointing to the screen. "Registered to Thomas Grayson for the past 3 years. Jake squinted at the list of entries tied to the van. "And look at this. All 5 of the Bambi Killer's victims disappeared during the time that he's owned that van." Before Lisa could respond, a voice from the neighboring desk cut in. "I hope you're not adding another name to that list." Jake and Lisa turned to see Detective Ben Alexander leaning on his desk, clutching a coffee cup in his hands. "What do you mean?" Jake asked. Alexander sighed, his expression weary. "Cunningham family was just in here. Their teenage daughter, Joni, didn't come home last night. Good kid, too. Bright, polite." Lisa straightened, a chill running down her spine. Joni Cunningham. Age 16, height 5'3", weight 115, black hair, blue eyes, 2 dimples, and just the right amount of freckling. Malone let out a low whistle. "She works part-time at her dad's hardware store," Alexander continued. "Left work to walk home last night, but never made it. Her mom's beside herself, and the brother looks like he's lost his best friend. Breaks her heart. At least it does mine." Jake and Lisa exchanged a look of dawning realization. Ben, Jake said, stepping closer. "Did Mr. Cunningham—" For a second I thought it was Lisa. "Ben," Jake said, stepping closer. "Did Mr. Cunningham mention anything unusual? Any customers Joni might have been helping?" Alexander frowned, sensing a shift in their demeanor. Not to me, he didn't, but then again, I just filled out a routine report. He held up an index card. I have their address right here. Lisa grabbed her jacket, her voice urgent. Jake, we need to talk to the Cunninghams. Jake snatched the index card out of Ben Alexander's hand as he and his partner raced, against time, out of the station. The Cunninghams lived in a cozy two-story suburban home with a meticulously maintained lawn. Mr. and Mrs. Cunningham sat in the living room, their faces etched with worry. Richie stood silently by the window, his jaw tight. 2 years ago, his older brother Chuck had vanished without a trace. The police had never suspected him, and over time, Richie had gradually come to believe that he'd gotten away with his brother's murder. But what had happened to Joni? She was no threat to inherit the hardware store, but would her disappearance now stir the police into reopening the books on Chuck? Would this unforeseen coincidence lead those crummy donut eaters right back to Richie? Potsy and Ralph Malph would have to be done away with. They'd been helpful with the disposal of Chuck's body, but it had weighed heavily on them. Richie could tell. They're weak, he thought to himself, not strong like me. Potsy was too dull to withstand extended police questioning, and Ralph would crack like cheap china on a cement floor. No, Richie decided they had to go. Perhaps a car accident. He could invite them for a night out on the town, Arnold's for hamburgers, then a drive-in movie. He'd sneak a bottle of whiskey from his dad's shelf and make a show of passing it around at the drive-in. Make sure plenty of kids in the surrounding cars saw them drinking throughout the movie. Those kids would make valuable witnesses after the accident that would occur on West Kilbourne during their drive home. An accident that only Richie would survive. Whatever the method, it would have to be plausible, and it would have to be soon. Wherever Joni is, Richie thought to himself, I hope she's never found, even if I am gonna kinda miss the little squirt. He saw a small Datsun Maxima pull into the driveway. He looked over his shoulder. The police are here, he said to his parents. Keep it under control, Richie, he said to himself. Jake and Lisa stood before the Cunninghams. Lisa had her notepad in hand. She got straight to the point. Mr. Cunningham, you mentioned that Joni helped you at the store yesterday afternoon. Was there anyone odd or unusual in the store while she was there? Howard Cunningham, a man with a mild demeanor, shook his head. No, the only customer we had all day was one of our regulars, he shrugged. The store hasn't been doing so well lately. That'll change once I get my hands on it, Richie muttered grimly from the window. But no one heard him. One of your regulars? Jake prodded. Yes, Howard said. Thomas Grayson. Thomas Grayson? Jake and Lisa said it in unison like a stunned chorus. Sure, Howard said with an amiable smile. He's been shopping with us for years. Joni was helping him find a few things. Duct tape, shovels, a pickaxe. Lisa glanced at Jake. Her Korean half-breed intuition was screaming. Mr. Cunningham, if Thomas Grayson has been shopping with you for years, why did he need Joni's help finding things? Jake finished the question with gravel in his voice. His instincts were also screaming. Howard shrugged and shook his head, still smiling amiably. Jake and Lisa looked at each other. They were both surprised and secretly thrilled that they shared the same hard glint of suspicion in their eyes. Before they could press Howard, however, the front door swung open, and a voice cried out, You've gotta find her! Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli, the Cunningham's leather jacket-wearing, motorcycle-riding tenant who lived in a room above the garage, strode into the home to raucous applause. His usual swagger was replaced by a throbbing desperation. She's like a little sister to me. Fonzie said it, grabbing Lisa by the shoulders. The shoulder pads in her suit jacket seemed to melt under his touch. He's so cool, she thought to herself as he stared into her eastern eyes. His Occidental eyes, usually confident, were glassy with unshed tears. Promise me you'll bring her home. Fonzie begged, his voice catching as he tried to prevent a public crying. Lisa's breath hitched at his touch. An electric shiver ran through her. She tried to cover the reaction with a firm nod. "We'll do everything we can, Fonzie." Jake put a hand on Fonzie's arm, gently pulling him back. "We'll find her," he promised, sounding as virile as the second coolest guy in the room could. Meanwhile, Richie had quietly slipped away up the stairs to his room. The driveway was empty when Jake and Lisa arrived at Thomas Grayson's house. His cool leisure van with the distinctive artwork on the side was nowhere in sight. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Looks like he's out. Again." Lisa glanced at the house, her eyes narrowing. "I guess we wait." Jake leaned back, his impatience evident. "A stakeout? Really?" Lisa shot him a look. "Yes, really, unless you've got a better idea." Jake threw up his hands. "Fine, a stakeout it is." They sat in silence for a few moments. "The Cunninghams seem like nice people," Lisa finally said. Jake nodded, his gaze fixed on the house. "They are. I just hope we're not too late." Jake shook his head, smirking. "By the way, that guy, Fonzie?" Lisa's cheeks flushed. "What about him?" He's something else." "What do you mean?" Lisa asked stiffly, though she had to fight to keep her imagination from wandering. "When he grabbed your shoulders," Jake mused, "you almost seemed like you were willing to thaw." Lisa rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. "He's cool, okay? He's cooler than you are, that's for sure." Jake chuckled. "I don't know about that." "Well, I do," Lisa said curtly. "When he touched me..." Her voice softened. I can't explain it." Jake raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He stroked his mustache, flummoxed. Thomas Grayson worked methodically, his pickaxe striking the ground with precision. The forest around him was silent except for the rhythmic thud of his tool and his cheerful whistling. Switching to a shovel, he began digging a large but shallow hole, the effort barely registering on his smiling face. After an hour of waiting, Jake's patience was finally worn thin. "This is pointless. I'm checking out the basement." Lisa grabbed his arm. "Jake, we don't have a warrant." Jake shrugged her off. "I'm just going to look around. If I find anything, then we can claim we got an anonymous tip. That little trick works every time." He jumped out of the Datsun Maxima and ran across the street before Lisa could object any further. Jake crept around the side of the house to the backyard. He nodded approvingly at the above-ground pool. Then, finding a basement window partially obscured by shrubs on the outside and some kind of insulation on the inside, he got down on one knee. Peering inside, his breath caught. Through a space in the insulation, he saw Joni tied to a chair, her unconscious face streaked with tears. Jake pulled out his .45 revolver and used the butt to break the window. The sound startled Joni awake. She let out a muffled scream. "Shh," Jake whispered, climbing inside. "It's okay, I'm a cop." He worked quickly to free her, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. As Joni tried to stand on unsteady legs, Jake wrapped his members-only jacket around her partially unclothed body. "Try not to get any blood on it," he begged her. As they heard the front door open upstairs, Jake's heart raced. Grayson's whistling echoed throughout the house. "I don't have a warrant," Jake whispered. "Technically, I'm breaking and entering. We have to get out of here." He hoisted Joni through the window, following close behind. Inside, Grayson descended the basement stairs, his cheerful tune stopping abruptly when he saw the empty chair. His scream of rage echoed and died against the soundproofed walls. Jake and Joni ran toward Lisa's car, Jake's arm securely around the girl. Lisa started the engine, her eyes darting to the house as the front door burst open. Grayson ran toward his van, his face twisted with fury. "Get in!" Lisa yelled to Jake and Joni. Jake hesitated instead of climbing into the back seat behind Joni. "Grayson!" he called out, leveling his gun at the Bambi killer. Grayson stopped, saw the .45 pointed at him from across the street, then leapt into his really cool leisure van with that rad artwork on the side, and he peeled out of the driveway. Jake fired 2 rounds at the van, hitting it twice. The second bullet shattered a rear window, causing its door to swing open as dozens of identical toy-stuffed deers spilled out onto the pavement. I'm not sure if deers is the correct plural. It might just be deer. The van raced away down the street. Jake slid across the hood of Lisa Parker Kim's sensible and reliable Datsun, then jumped into the passenger seat. "Let's go!" he cried out. Lisa Parker Kim floored the gas pedal, flipped a bitch, and gave chase. Jake leaned forward. "Stay on him!" Lisa gritted her teeth. "I'm trying." Grayson swerved through traffic, his van veering dangerously close to other cars. Lisa followed, her driving erratic but effective. "You drive like a woman," Jake teased, gripping the dash. Lisa shot him a glare. "You mean an Asian woman?" "You know I do," he growled, "but you're doing great." Lisa pressed the gas pedal harder, ramming the van's rear bumper. Grayson lost control. His vehicle skidded off the road and landed in a ditch. Back at headquarters, the Cunninghams rushed to Joni as she walked through the precinct doors, her face pale but unharmed. Marion embraced her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Howard placed a protective hand on her shoulder. His relief was palpable. Richie grinned, his voice shaky. "Told you they'd find her," he bluffed. Fonzie, standing off to the side, finally exhaled. He stepped forward, pulling Joni into a bear hug. "I'm so glad you're okay, kid." Joni smiled up at him. Thanks to them. Fonzie and the Cunninghams turned to Jake and Lisa. Howard spoke first. "We can't thank you enough." Lisa smiled, "Just doing our job." As the family walked out, Jake caught Joni whispering to Fonzie, "I've learned some new tricks for you." Fonzie smirked, glancing around before sharing a knowing look with her. Jake raised an eyebrow. Lisa laughed. "I told you he's cooler than you are." Jake grinned, his tone softening. "You did nice work out there, partner." He extended his hand. Lisa looked at him, her smile genuine. "You too." She reached out and they laughed as they shook hands. "Coming from you, that's practically a standing ovation," Jake smirked. She laughed and mockingly clapped her hands. "Well, I mean it," she said. "You trusted me, even with the whole ESP thing. That was pretty cool." He shrugged, his smirk softening into something almost sincere. "You were right. Your hunch about Grayson's van nailed it, and you handled the chase, well..." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Like an Asian woman driver?" Jake held up his hands defensively. "Hey, that's the way I drive." Lisa laughed. I guess we're not as bad a team as I feared we'd be." Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess we're not." Before either could say more, the doors to Romano's office flew open. Captain Romano stormed out, his face red with fury. "Stone! Parker Kim!" he barked. "They found 2 more bodies in Whitney Park. A couple of teenage boys. Ralph Malf and a Warren Weber, alias Potsy. Looks like they drowned while swimming drunk, but I want you 2 to check it out." Jake groaned. "Here we go." Lisa smirked, her face freeze-framing oddly for a moment before she was able to say, "Another day in paradise." Jake started to laugh, but then his face freeze-framed for 3 full seconds before he was able to resume and complete the laugh. Captain Romano looked thoroughly confused by what was going on between them when suddenly his entire body freeze-framed for 3 seconds. The moment he was able to resume motion, he shook his head and grumbled, "I'm getting too old for this shit." He turned and walked back into his office. Jake Malone and his new, trusted partner, Lisa Parker Kim, laughed anew as their bodies spontaneously suspended animation for a full week. Credits rolled relentlessly over wax figure-like personages. Then the network cut to commercials before returning with a montage of Jake and Lisa Parker Kim's adventures playing behind the final credits.
Edge of the Badge is filmed before a live studio audience. Edge of the Badge, starring Cory Buckner as Jake Malone and Angela Kwan as Lisa Parker Kim. Also starring Harry Bellavito as Captain Romano, with Tom Bosley as Howard Cunningham, Marion Ross as his supple wife, Opie Howard as their quietly desperate middle child, Aaron Moran as their precocious daughter, special appearance by Henry Winkler as the Fonz, and special guest star Jeffrey Allen Spencer as Thomas Grayson.
Fim.